Is he expelled or does he resign first?
I'm not sure. I think he may just go for the expulsion. I don't really see that from his standpoint he has much to lose. I think this is the end of the road for him. That 56-page report, which I have read cover to cover, is an absolute blockbuster. It goes into minute detail about everything that he did. The fact that he's tried to blame this on his former treasurer, that he claims that he's a victim. A lot of this sounds very familiar in the sense that he's basically adopted the Trumpian way of attacking these allegations. And I think if he continues that way, he's probably going to hang in there and he'll be expelled.
Well, you're talking about this blockbuster report. I want to bring our audience, for those who haven't read the report, some of what it says. It says Santos, quote, sought to fraudulently exploit every aspect of his House candidacies for his own personal financial profit, blatantly stole from his campaign, deceived donors, reported fictitious loans, diverted more campaign money to himself, and he sustained all of this through a constant series of lies to his constituents, donors, and staff about his background and experience. Sir, what happens when he's out of office? Does that make this much harder for him in terms of his legal path forward?
Well, his legal path forward is not looking good. He's now under indictment in the Eastern District of New York for fraud, not only for relating to his political donations, but also to fraud in obtaining unemployment insurance. This report also refers a number of these false statements he made both to the Federal Election Commission and to the House committee that takes in all of the statements, financial statements from congressmen. He's in a deep boatload of trouble. And I don't think anything could get any worse for him than this. I don't see him ever being able to get employed after this. I don't see him being able to do anything. I mean, he really has basically burned himself to the core here, lying about his background, who he is, what he did, and stole lots of money from political donors. He set up scams where he claimed to, have donated himself or loaned for $80,000 to his campaign, which he's being paid back for, that he never loaned in the first place. So there are a whole series of scams like that he's in deep trouble for.
He's using campaign money apparently to pay for his OnlyFans account, Mr. Ackerman. This just gets better the further you read down this. It wouldn't keep him from making a lot of money writing a book, would it?
Probably not. I mean, maybe that's the best thing he can do, and he could even play himself, I suppose, in the movie afterwards. But I suppose he could do Botox commercials. I mean, one of the things he spent the campaign money on was Botox. So I don't know if Botox really thought hard about it. They might think maybe they could have him do some commercials.
When you read through this, I just have to ask, given your time, Mr. Ackerman, the life you lived during the Watergate scandal, what do you make of where we are right now?
Well, first of all, back in 1973 or 4, at the end, when Nixon resigned, I was absolutely convinced this would never happen again in my lifetime. It's happened in my lifetime now between Trump, between George Santos, and everything else that we're seeing in the Republican Party. It's really the same thing, but worse, as far as I can tell. You've got it kind of spreading into our entire politics. You don't have the Republican Party really coming together and trying to cleanse itself of this cancer that is on the presidency, to quote John Dean from back in the Watergate days. I just think we're in a very bad spot right now where our democracy is at stake, that people are unfortunately relying on a lot of these lies. The lies that George Santos was telling are not much different than the lies that Donald Trump is on trial right now for in New York State with respect to his financial statements. So you're looking at a lot of the same behavior by these two politicians. Unfortunately,
Well, that's an
I think
interesting thing that you point out, though. In that case, is there going to be a conversation about a double standard in the Republican Party once George Santos goes away?
Oh, I think absolutely there is. I mean, you're going to see that George Santos is going to be expelled. And I think the problem here is that Republicans are looking at this trial date in the Eastern District, which is scheduled for September of this coming year, which is right in the middle of the congressional campaign. Now, you've got to ask yourselves, why are the Republicans not as concerned about the trials that are coming up for Donald Trump on March 4th in the District of Columbia, on May 2nd or 3rd in Florida, and then the following cases are going to take place in Manhattan and then in Georgia. So any of those could blow up. Well, most likely each of them will result in convictions. So you've got to ask yourself, why is the Republican Party not taking the same posture with Donald Trump that I think they're going to wind up taking with George Santos?
Right, but one's the former U.S. president, and the other one is a brand new congressman from the 3rd District of New York. But you mentioned those slew of cases, the former president and his legal troubles ahead. Which are you most specifically focused on?
Well, I think the one to focus on right now is the one in Washington, D.C., the election interference case. I don't think there's any doubt that that is going to move ahead on March 3rd or 4th, whatever it is. And the judge has already set down a January date to start the process of selecting a jury in that case. It's only one defendant. It's not very complicated in terms of motions. So I think that one, if you read through that indictment, the evidence here is going to be overwhelming. You've got the former Vice President, Mike Pence, testifying against him as a star witness. You've got his own lawyers who are White House counsel that will be testifying against him. You've got other people like Kenneth Chesebro, who's come out in Georgia now, is cooperating, that's met with Donald Trump and is likely to testify in this case. There's a whole slew of witnesses that are going to be testifying, not to mention the fact that Donald Trump is on tape in Georgia, which they'll also use in that case. So I think that's going to be kind of the first case where you're going to see Donald Trump convicted and basically sent to prison.
Well, we saw the Speaker of the House today unleash all of the January 6th security tape footage. I don't have much time, Mr. Ackerman, but I wonder your thoughts on any impact that might have on these cases.
Well, I don't think it's going to have an impact on these cases, but I think it was a sop thrown to kind of that 8-member caucus in the House, the far right-wing Getz group, to help what they think will help the people who have been charged with crimes for January 6th, because they normally couldn't get this from the government, the executive branch under Brady, which requires them to give information out that's exculpatory, but this permits them to get this stuff off of the website of the Congress of the U.S. House. So I don't think that's going to go anywhere, but I'm sure that's the motive behind this.